name is Lynn Lee, and I'm the marine ecologist for Guayhanas National Park Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and Haida Heritage Site. So the project we're working on is called Chihu til Inastel in Haida, and that translates to nurturing seafood to grow. And what we're trying to do is restore kelp forests, and the reason behind it is because we lost sea otters in our ecosystem about 200 years ago with the maritime fur trade. And so this project is trying to nurture kelp forests to grow back because the loss of sea otters has caused a hyperabundance of various invertebrates, including sea urchins have become hyperabundant and they've eaten a lot of the kelp. The main success of the project is collaborating. So it's collaboration with our management partners, which in Guayhanas were co-managed between the Haida Nation and the federal government, including Fisheries and Oceans and Parks Canada. And so part of the success is working with our management partners, working with the urchin fishing industry and working with academia in order to achieve this kelp forest restoration and also learn and understand the changes in the ecosystem that are happening because of the restoring of this kelp forest. And then improve the habitat for culturally and ecologically important species like abalone and rockfish, and those are also species at risk.
We're looking at what's happening in Alaska, what's happening in California, how different coastal communities like Cayucot has been affected, because that was one of the first areas where the sea otters showed up and expanded rapidly, and how that relates with all the stakeholders.
So the Haida Nation are a management partner in Guayhanas, so they've been part of this project right from the start. So right from developing the interest in the project to how we were going to do it. We work in collaboration with the Haida Fisheries Program, and they do all the survey work in terms of looking at the changes in ecosystem structure. So they come in every year, at least once a year, and often more than once, to survey permanent transects along those sites for how many abalone and urchins we have, what the size of those animals are, and also the fish community and the invertebrate community that's associated with this kelp forest. And what we're looking for is how those communities will start to change as the kelp forest gets restored.
The Haida Fisheries Program's been around since 1989. It basically looks after a lot of resources on island. We do a lot of monitoring work, so we have a salmon biologist and we have a shellfish biologist, and I handle a lot of the invertebrate files. My involvement in the kelp restoration project has been from the start. When we first got going, we did a lot of preliminary surveys on the area, getting baseline data of the area, kind of getting a sense of what the barrens were doing before we started to treat the area.
So we started this project in 2017, and we started out with some pre-restoration surveys in the summer of 2017 and summer of 2018. So we have 2 years of data kind of showing us what the ecosystem was like before the restoration work. And then in the fall of 2018 and the spring of 2019, we did a bunch of restoration work, which meant removing or killing 75 to 95% of the urchins at the site. And that reduction in density of urchins is equivalent to what we've seen sea otters doing in the ecosystem when they come back to places along the coast. We're monitoring the fishery, and we're checking out where the boats are fishing and asking the boats how the quality of the urchins are, and just getting a sense of what they're seeing underwater. The divers are now working at the site as part of the restoration maintenance by keeping the urchins under control. And so that's what the crew today has been up to.
We're checking out what they did last year. Came in here and crushed a bunch of urchins that were eating all the kelp to see if the kelp can come back. And it looks very good on that part for kelp coming back. It's at quite an increase from what was here last year.
We did 0 to 30 for, I don't know what that block was. It was a pretty big area. I kept a good count, so I was smashing 4,000 urchins a day.
Wow.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, and
reclaiming the kelp forests one urchin at a time.
The 8 months after the work, we went back to resurvey in the summer of 2019, and we saw this incredible kelp growth in some places from no kelp at all to over 300 stipes of kelp along one of our 30-meter long transects. And so the recovery has been pretty incredible in a very short period of time. And that's partly because kelp, the annual bull kelp, grows from a little seedling essentially to 30 feet high in less than a season, so in basically 6 months or so. So within this 8 months of the work, we got this incredible ecosystem response. But that kelp is an annual, so it dies back every year. So what we are seeing now are the baby kelps growing back in the area that we've restored, but we don't see it from the surface like we do in the summer because the kelp from last year has died back and now it has to grow back up again.
Obviously, we've got a bigger response from the kelps themselves. Bull kelp was very noticeable last year, even in as early as March of last year in 2019, we were seeing baby bull kelp everywhere.
This is my first season doing it, but the boat has done it last year. They took all this area out and we've gone back and dove it and it's gone. I mean, there's babies, of course, washing in and growing again, but it isn't a whole fields and fields of them. They're tiny bits, and we can see bulbs of kelp down there, so it's doing something for sure.
So as part of the science of the work, we are working with academics from Florida State University, University of British Columbia, University of New Brunswick, and also University of Oregon to look at changes in the ecosystem processes and structure that are going on as the kelp forest gets restored. So for example, we've looked at the metabolic rate, or how much oxygen the urchins up in the kelp line that get lots of food are consuming versus their metabolic rate where they're in the barrens, and that's the place where there's not a lot of food but a lot of urchins. And so what we're finding is that the metabolic rate of these urchins that are in the kelp line and getting lots of food is much higher than the same size of urchin that's down in the barrens. And that's because those urchins, when they don't get enough food, have the ability to slow down their metabolism and not have to use as much energy to survive. The other big difference then means that those urchins in the kelp are able to produce the uni, or the roe, that people like to eat, but those urchins that are in the barrens have very little of the uni. So for reproduction of the urchins, it means that those urchins at the kelp line are producing the majority of the eggs and the sperm that need to produce new urchins in the next generation. So most of that is coming from the feed line or the shallow places where the kelp is versus in the barrens. Most projects have an end to their lifetime, and so we have a 5-year lifespan for this restoration project to show the success that it can have, but the maintenance of that project is not, the funding is not maintained within the same project envelope as the original proposal. So what we have to do is find creative ways of working with the partners in the project, like the Pacific Urchin Harvesters Association, to try and see if we can maintain those restoration gains by benefiting both industry and conservation. And so we see this as a positive step towards working together within the Marine Conservation Area and Haida Heritage Site, because it's a place where we can work together to try and support both conservation gains and the needs of industry. What I think is really important here is that we're all working together. There are always going to be bumps in the road. It's not always, we don't always see eye to eye on how things should be done, but I feel like all of us working together and talking about where we want to get to and how we get there is going to benefit everyone in the long run. And because we have this new zoning for Guayhanas in terms of open areas and closed areas, we are really looking to work with all of our partners and our the fishing industry associations to use the zoning and learn from it, to learn what the ecosystem effects of fishing are, what the ecosystem effects of not fishing are, and to try and learn something that would benefit all of the marine protected areas and closed areas that apply across the coast. So what we're doing here in Guayhanas, and by working with industry, allows us to learn more for everybody's benefit.
Through Haida Fisheries, we work doing surveys and other stuff for Puha, right? So, I think the more we can collaborate and find areas to work together rather than doing things separately, it makes a lot of sense to me.
I think it's a great example of how industry and communities can work together.